Life is not a baseball game. 3 strikes is Brian James. Life is not a baseball game.
3 strikes is the most important victory yet in the fight to take back our streets.
3 strikes is Brian James.
Well, it was passed by the legislature in the wave of people wanting revenge for Polly's murder. The legislature, before Polly's case, they thought it was idiotic, but then they were afraid to vote against it because there was an election coming up. So they all voted for it, and it got in. Then, to make sure it couldn't be repealed by the legislature with less than a 2/3 vote, what they did was run an initiative through. I'm talking about Reynolds and Wilson, and they paid a couple of $1 million, which they had no trouble getting. They got most of it from the National Rifle Association and the Prison Guards Union.
And I was told if this had been in effect, Richard Allen Davis would not have been released from prison. That was good enough for me without analyzing it. I was in solid grief. They'd found my granddaughter's body flung out into a toxic dump in Cloverdale by this monster. So naturally I went for it. And then 2 months later, when I calmed down a little bit, I decided to read the damn thing. And in all that time, I never once heard anyone ever mention that strikes could be called on people for offenses, petty crimes.
Most of the folks that I prosecute are not, they're not white, okay? And they're poor, and they're addicted.
Go down to the Los Angeles criminal courtroom, sit there for one day, and you'll see who goes to prison. You'll see African American and Spanish speaking people coming in their jumpsuits all day long, and you look at who's in there defending them, prosecuting them, and judging them.
Blacks in California are being sentenced under 3 strikes at 14 times the rate of whites. It's extraordinary. If you were setting out to design a law that targeted blacks, you could hardly do better than a one that affects them at 14 times the rate of whites. And there's no evidence that that's backed up by criminality in California. Blacks are not 14 times as likely to get arrested for crimes as whites are. They're just 14 times as likely to be struck out under the 3 strikes law.
I got struck out on a dope case. It's sad. It's sad. It's real sad that undercover officer approach you and ask you to go get somebody to sell some dope. I mean, it's wrong because it's trickery. Now, if I'm walking down the street minding my own business, and here you come and ask me, do I know who somebody buys some dope? Yeah, I live in the ghetto. I know. So I tell you go down the street and get, buy some dope. That person sell you some dope, then you come down the street and get me, take me to trial for sales of cocaine. I never touched no money, no dope, but you give me 25 to life.
Blacks are much more likely to be meted out harsh sentences under the 3 strikes law. So I think we're fooling ourselves if we think that, racism has been eradicated from the criminal justice system.
If you're an African American, Spanish-speaking person, and you've got 1 or 2 strikes, man, you got a big target on your back.
Well, there's 2 parts to the law. The first part says that if you have, and it's considered the 2-strike part of the law, if you have 1 prior serious or violent felony and then commit any felony, you get double the sentence. The 3-strike part of the law says if you commit 2 or more serious or violent felonies and then commit any felony, you will get at a minimum 25 years to life. There's no good time credits, it's 100%, so the first time anybody can be up for parole is after 25 years.
The California Penal Code lists what are deemed violent felonies. It lists what are deemed serious felonies. And California's 3 strikes law requires that the first 2 strikes must be violent or serious felonies. What makes California's three strikes law different from every other three strikes law in the country is that the third strike in California doesn't have to be a serious or violent felony.
When we allow the last strike to be any felony, we're broadening the law to include over 400 different crimes. And that includes things like shoplifting, which is petty theft with a prior, grand theft, larceny, fraud.
There's a kid serving 25 years to life for setting fire to a garbage can. You know, that's ridiculous. That's not fair. It's offensive to my sense of justice.
This was a law that when it was being voted on by the public, all that was talked about was violent criminals, violent criminals. Now 10 years later, we come into our prison system and what do we see? 2/3 of the people locked up under the law are nonviolent offenders.
You live in a state and you support a law that imprisons people, that cages people for the rest of their lives who have done nothing more than shoplift, or victimless crimes, or who are drug addicts. And that is frightening, and we tolerate that.
What do we want? Freedom! When do we want it? Now!
The shoplifter and the drug addicted would spend the rest of their life side by side with the murderer and the rapist. Maximum security prison, life terms.
There was a poll done in the state, and people were asked what they wanted to see cut. What was the, one department they wanted to see cut? And overwhelmingly people said prisons. That's a big response, and that tells us something. Though they want to make it seem like, oh no, public safety and people are afraid. They're not, because they know the idiocy of a law like three strikes, and they agree, You can throw a lie in their way and, probably convince them for a bit. Anybody can be convinced by a lie. They don't know it's a lie. So when Schwarzenegger convinced a state that changing this law would release 26,000 people, they believed it. How could they think otherwise? Why would they think otherwise? So that's what we're up against. So there's definitely a new interest in prison reform, in the prison industrial complex, in understanding what prisons do and their role, and therefore in sentencing and three strikes reform. We're in an economic crisis, which is bad enough, but the prison budget, continues to grow while everything else is shrinking. I mean, people are aware that we're spending, prison is #1 spending in this state, and education is almost down to the 50th in the country. High school dropouts are, I think it's something like 68% more likely to go to prison. If that's the case, why don't we put the money into education and take it out of prison? We still have over 4,000 people rotting in there at the cost of $50,000 a year. 4,000 of them are in there for property crimes, so relatively minor crimes. What a travesty that is, and what an affront to justice that is. When these folks got 25 years to life for, let's say, taking a pair of socks, somebody that committed murder got 25 to life, first-degree murder. The person who committed first-degree murder will be up for parole, maybe 16, 17 years. The striker is not up for parole until 25 years.
25 to life is what we give not for murder in this state, but for first-degree murder in this state. Second-degree murder is supposed to be 15 to life. So why should petty larceny and first-degree murder get the same penalties? There isn't a good moral framework for answering that question, and to my mind the answer is they shouldn't.
Of course, we have the opposition out there saying the same thing over and over, that it was for violent crime, and yet we know that there's many in there. We know that 65% of them, at least, are in there for a non-violent crime.
Who would know that me trying to help my son would help get him 25 years to life? I had started going to Tough Love back in the mid-'80s when Shane started doing drugs. And we were told as part of Tough Love that you take a bottom line and you turn them into the police if they're doing something wrong, and they'll take responsibility and they'll quit doing their drugs. In 1990, when he committed residential burglary, which I thought was just stealing for your parents to buy drugs, but they tell me it was residential burglary of my house and my next door neighbors. and he stole from us. He even stole his own jewelry. That I had a Hawaiian wedding ring and a bracelet. Yeah, he stole his own things, but still I knew he was doing it for drugs. I called the police. I asked my neighbors to call the police, and they really didn't want to. But I thought that he was going to get some kind of rehabilitation. I thought the police and the courts were going to be there to help me. That's what I thought they were for. I didn't realize that they were just there to prosecute my son and put him in prison. But that's strikes 1 and 2. And 7 years later, in 1996, came strike 3.
He was arrested for aiding and abetting the sale of $20 of cocaine. He was with a friend. The friend had walked to the end 30 feet away from him and sold a $20 rock of cocaine to an undercover officer. My son was standing 30 feet from him, and he had no drugs on him and no drugs in him, but they picked them both up, and he was tried as a co-defendant. They're tried together. But they don't tell a jury in California that it's a 3-strike case. The other co-defendant, he was given a sentence of 4 years and did 2 years in state prison for his hand-to-hand sale of $20 of rock cocaine. And my son was given a sentence of 25 years to life for watching that drug sale.
My tough love has kind of put my son in prison for 25 years, minimum. So I have to keep finding a way to try and get my son out of prison, and a lot of others as well.
California mother is fighting to free her only son after she helped put him in jail for life.
We're shooting for 600,000 signatures plus.
It's hard on families. It's really hard. You know, families grow up, they move on, they get married, they die. Shane went in 27 years old. If he has to do the entire 25 years, the first date he could apply for the Board of Prison terms to allow him to come out would be 55 years old. But that's not going to happen. I've never believed that. Never believed that. I honestly believe Shane will be home.
We've tried legislation. We've been to the Capitol every year. We've had 9 pieces of legislation. This is not tough on crime. This is not smart on crime. It's certainly not fiscally responsible. So we have no other choice but to go forward with an initiative to somehow get our family members out of it.
Educate, don't incarcerate! 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 Educate, don't incarcerate!
California law was born of terrible human tragedy, but it was sold with fear-packed lies, tricking many of our citizens into voting for those lies.
Yes.
Well, the citizens of California are no longer unaware. With 70% of the voters telling us that they back our position, we will move forward to amend this law so that men and women with non-violent third offenses will not be subject to such outrageous sentences dictated by this deceitful law. And billions of dollars a year can then be used to improve schools, parks, and public transportation. We are being sold a bill of goods which says our streets will not be safe unless our prisons are full. But we know better now. 17 years of 3 strikes has not made our streets safer.
No.
Instead, 17 years of 3 strikes has robbed families of their loved ones while robbing taxpayers of billions of dollars.